Let's dive into the endocrine glands and hormones. As a brief review of anatomy, you remember that the glands are made by epithelial tissue, and that glands can be organized into major groups. The exocrine glands that produce a product and is secreted outside the body, like the mammary glands, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, salivary glands, and the list is larger. But the other group of glands are enclosed in that organization that are endocrine glands. The endocrine glands produce a product, and the product is called hormones. The hormones are released in the bloodstream without using a duct. Because of that, they are ductless. Now, the hormone is produced by the endocrine gland and released into the bloodstream. In the bloodstream, that hormone is looking for the specific target cell. And the target cell has specific receptors for those particular hormones. We have also organs in our body that they are acting as a secondary activity. They are acting as endocrine gland, like for example the heart, the liver, the kidneys are sample of those, and I will refer to those later in this chapter. We have also neurohormones. Neurohormones because there are specialized cells in the hypothalamus that produce that hormones, and that hormones are stored in the posterior pituitary. Now, it's not the time to talk specifically about the neurohormones, but we will talk about these neurohormones at the time to explain the posterior pituitary hormones. Now, the hormones broadly function is regulate the metabolism, the growth, and reproduction. Between the most important functions, the functions are really larger than those. In this graphic, you visualize the most important glands, the major endocrine glands in our body. They are not all of them, but these one are the largest one. From the top, you have the pineal gland. The pineal gland that is located in the epithalamus, in the posterior part of the epithalamus, and the one that secrete melatonin. Underneath, you have the pituitary gland that is hanging down from the hypothalamus. Going down, you have the thyroid gland. And in this graphic that is not represented, we have another gland in the chest. It's in the middle of the chest, behind the sternum, and in front of the heart, that is the thymus gland. But if we continue going down, we have in the top of the kidneys the adrenal gland or suprarenal gland. We also have next to those the pancreas. The pancreas is an organ that is acting as exocrine gland or endocrine gland. As endocrine gland, the pancreas contains the pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans, the one that produce, they have contain the beta cells and alpha cells, the one that produce insulin and glucagon. And if we continue going down, we have the gonads. For males, you have the testes, and for females, you have the ovaries. These one are the major endocrine glands. I invite everyone to take a look about this graphic. It's not pretty much organized, but you have really a partial listing of endocrine glands and also which one are the major effects of these endocrine glands. I took the time to classify the hormones by the chemical structure in 4 different groups. The groups are amines, polypeptides and proteins, glycoproteins, and steroids. The amine group, chemically, the amines are molecules similar like amino acid. Sample of those we have epinephrine, norepinephrine, melatonin, and T4. Epinephrine and norepinephrine is produced by the adrenal medulla. Melatonin is produced by the pineal gland, and T4 is produced by is one of the hormones produced by the thyroid. The second group is called polypeptides and proteins. Polypeptides and proteins samples, not all of those, but samples are the ADH, antidiuretic hormone, OT, oxytocin, GH, growth hormone, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, parathyroid hormone, insulin, and glucagon are the most remarkable samples of polypeptides and proteins. ADH and oxytocin are produced in the hypothalamus and stored in vesicles within the posterior pituitary lobe. These one are the two samples of neurohormones. Growth hormone is secreted by the anterior pituitary. ACTH is secreted by the anterior pituitary as well, and the target we will refer later on in more detail. Parathyroid hormone is produced by the parathyroid gland, located into the posterior part. There are 4 little beads embedded in the posterior part of the thyroid hormone that is around our neck. Insulin and glucagon are another sample of polypeptides and proteins. Let's jump into the glycoproteins hormones. Sample of those we have the FSH, LH, and TSH. Follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are produced in the anterior pituitary lobe, and the target are the gonads, testes in males and ovaries in females. The TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is produced also by the anterior pituitary, and the target is the thyroid itself. The last group of classification of hormones are the steroids, and the steroids samples are cortisol, that is produced in the adrenal cortex, testosterone, progesterone, and estradiol. Estradiol is estrogen. These are the samples of sex hormones. Also, vitamin D3 is one sample of steroid molecule. I invite everybody to read this graphic that describes the polypeptides and glycoproteins hormones, like I described it before, but please don't pay attention about the structure, but yes, pay attention about the gland that is producing that hormone and the primary effect of those. I will amplify this concept with a particular individual video to address these hormones. After we classify the hormones based in the molecular structure, we can classify the hormones by the action, and this classification doesn't differ from the classification of molecules. Therefore, the hormones can be classified in polar or non-polar. Now, the polar molecules are water-soluble, are hydrophilic or lipophobic, and they cannot cross the cell membrane freely by themselves. They need a carrier. And sample of that, not only we have obviously the proteins, the polypeptides, the glycoproteins, and we can include the norepinephrine and epinephrine from the amines. Basically, most of the amines groups are also polar hormones. In a non-polar hormones, those are insoluble in water, means that they are hydrophobic or lipophilic. And this one they can target the cell directly, means that they can cross the cell membrane by diffusion. And sample of those are obviously the steroid hormones, any of the steroid, sex hormones, the cortisol hormones, but also we can include the T4 and melatonin, even when they are amines molecules, they are the exemption in the amines. T4 and melatonin also behave like nonpolar hormones. We have common aspects between the nervous system and the endocrine system in the terms of regulation. The hormones and neurotransmitters both interact with specific receptors. We learned that the neurotransmitters are bonding with the specific receptor, and the hormones also need a receptor. The hormones are always looking for the target cells and the specific receptor for those. Now, binding with this receptor causes a change within the cell that is the target cell. And there are mechanisms to turn off the target cell activity, means inhibit or activate. Also, the neurotransmitters and hormones have many similarities, um, but differences as well. And some hormones can also be neurotransmitters in the central nervous system, like, for example, but not only, epinephrine and norepinephrine. The hormones also can produce interaction between each other, and there are three types of interaction: synergistic effect, permissive effects, or antagonistic effects. In a synergistic effect occur when the two or more hormones work together to produce a particular effect, and one enhances the other one. For example, prolactin hormone is necessary to produce milk after birth. But this prolactin has a synergistic effect with estrogen and oxytocin as well. In a permissive effect occur when one hormone makes the target cell more responsive to the second hormone. Sample of that occur, for example, with estrogen, that estrogen makes the uterus more responsive to progesterone. And the third case, antagonistic effect, that is probably the most popular between all the three, is when the hormones they have a totally opposite function and directions. A sample of those is insulin and glucagon. Insulin decrease the glucose level, glucose increase the glucose level. They have also effect in the adipose tissue, but I want you to be focused in these two antagonic effects of insulin and glucagon. But sample of antagonistic effect is also calcitonin and the parathyroid hormone. Calcitonin is the one that decreases the calcium level in the bloodstream, and parathyroid hormone is the one that increases the calcium level in the bloodstream. The hormone concentration on tissue responds to one particular topic, that is the hormone half-life, that refer to the optimal hormone concentration in plasma, and it differs from hormone to hormone. Some of them can last for a few minutes and some of them can last for a few days. Sometimes the hormone concentration affects the number of receptors in the target cells. This one is the case of, for example, the ADH, antidiuretic hormone. In this case, when the hormone is released, increase the aquaporins in the cells, in the epithelial cells of the collecting tube in the nephrons. So basically, that concentration of hormone is related to increase the amount of receptors, and obviously is called upregulation. However, when the hormone concentration is continually high, the target cells can be desensitized or produce a downregulation. So when that concentration exceeds the time that they should be in plasma, that target cells become desensitized. To avoid desensitizations, many hormones are released in spores called pulsatile secretion. Regardless the type of molecular structure and the type of hormones, certainly the hormones need to reach the particular target cell. Now, and obviously not only the target cell, also the specific receptor. Now, this receptor for that specific hormone can be located in different places. Can be located in the cell membrane of the target cell or can be located inside the cell of that target cell. And this one is the differences if the hormone is lipophilic or lipophobic. In case of lipophilic that we are talking about the steroid hormones, for example, that are lipophilic or hydrophobic, these hormone receptors are located in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus, means inside the target cell. Why? Because that hormone can cross the cell membrane by diffusion. So the receptor is inside the target cell, either in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. On the other type of molecule or other type of hormones that are the nonpolar or water-soluble hormones that are also called hydrophilic or lipophobic, they need a receptor that allows them to cross the cell membrane. So that receptor is on the other surface of the plasma membrane or on the plasma membrane by itself. Let me explain in more detail the different type of hormones and how they cross the cell membrane. In case of the lipophilic hormones, non-polar hormones, steroid hormones, cortisol hormones, and including the T4 hormone, that is a type of amine but is behave like a lipophilic and other lipophilic hormone. They travel to the target cell when the hormone is produced and released in the bloodstream. Need a carrier because it's adipose molecule, and need a carrier that helps it. That carrier is another protein. Commonly is the albumin protein, but certainly this protein that is a carrier allow that lipophilic steroid hormone to travel in the bloodstream until they reach the target cell. When they are in front of the target cell, they detach from the carrier and diffuse in the target cell membrane. Now, the receptor is found either is found inside the target cell, either in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. And sometimes they have more than one receptor. But it's important to know that that receptors are called nuclear receptors because they activate genetic transcription of the RNA. Let's visualize the action or the mechanism of the steroid hormone. That steroid hormone, as I mentioned before, in the case of sex hormones that are also produced in the adrenal cortex, that hormone is released in the bloodstream. We mentioned that nothing different so far. In the bloodstream, they match the carrier. The carrier protein is very commonly used is the albumin protein, but this one is a carrier protein that helps that hormone to swim in the bloodstream. Swimming in the bloodstream, continue swimming until they found the target cell. When it's in front of the target cell, that hormone detached from the carrier protein, cross the cell membrane by diffusion and get into the target cell. When it's into the target cell, in the target cell, in the cytoplasm, bind with the receptor. That one is the location of that receptor for steroid hormones. And the receptor is the one that help that protein, is like a public transportation that help that hormone to um, walk into the cytoplasm and cross the nucleus membrane. That receptor and hormone cross the nucleus membrane, and when it's inside the nucleus, that particular hormone has the specific effect. And the effect of this hormone is therefore to produce a new protein, because what is the final target of this hormone is to reach the DNA and request the DNA to reproduce the code of the protein that is in need. So basically, this one is the final destination of this hormone. The target is the DNA, requesting the DNA, release the code for that particular hormone that is in need. Basically, when that DNA release the code into always the RNA. The RNA. And the RNA is the one that is capable to leave the nucleus. RNA, first is the transcription, second one is the messenger RNA, and the messenger RNA need to find the particular structure to reproduce that protein. And that structure is specifically the ribosome. So that one is the mechanism for the steroid hormone. Let's see how the thyroid hormone, or T4, is crossing the cell membrane and when they reach the receptor. The T4, even when it's an amine, behave like a nonpolar molecule. Yes, neither carrier. T4 is secreted by the thyroid gland, and neither carrier, a carrier protein for this T4 that help that molecule to swim inside the bloodstream, inside the plasma, until they reach the target cell. Now, these targets, when it's in front of the target cell, detach from the carrier, cross the cell membrane by diffusion, and inside the cell membrane, the T4 have to be converted in T3. Why they need to be converted in T3? Because inside the cytoplasm of the target cell, there is a primary receptor, or a binding protein. It's a type of receptor, basically. But this receptor is made for T3, not for T4. So that's the reason why T4 is converted in T3 to bind with the binding protein. This one is acting as a receptor, and this binding protein, or primary receptor, is the one that allows the T3 to walk into the cytoplasm to move close to the nucleus. When it's in front of the nucleus, that T3 detach from the binding protein and cross the nucleus membrane. Inside the nucleus membrane, there is a receptor, a specific receptor for the T3. And this T3 with the receptor is the one that finally reach the target, that is the DNA. In the DNA produce the same effect, request into the DNA the production of a protein. So basically the DNA is providing the code, a specific code for that protein that is needed to be produced, transcribed into the RNA, and the RNA is converted in messenger. The messenger is the one that is exiting the nucleus, crossing the nucleus membrane, and in the cytoplasm reach again the ribosome, because it's the only place where we can produce proteins based in the code bringing from the nucleus within the RNA. So basically, these one are the two mechanisms that are slightly different from steroid hormones or thyroid hormone. Please pay attention about this topic that is really important. And some hormones use a second messenger. There are different hormones that use a second messenger, but the most remarkable one is the tyrosine kinase. This particular hormone cannot cross, we are talking about insulin, for example, that cannot cross the cell membrane. Insulin is a polypeptide, cannot cross the cell membrane, is hydrophilic, is lipophobic, is a polar molecule, and all the classification I mentioned before. But certainly that insulin needs to bind with the specific receptor, and this receptor is use a secondary messenger that is the tyrosine kinase that I will explain in the next graphic. So keep in mind that this tyrosine kinase is the unique receptor for insulin, only for insulin. And another important characteristic of this tyrosine kinase is not only a receptor, it's a carrier, but also is a combination. It's not a pure protein, but is a combination. Exteriously to the cell membrane is a protein, and interiorly of the cell membrane is an enzyme. This is called the tyrosine kinase system. Insulin and growth factors uses these systems. The receptor is also the enzyme tyrosine kinase, but there are slightly different from this tyrosine kinase for used by insulin that the one is used by growth factors. But certainly the final action of the tyrosine, the insulin tyrosine kinase is increasing, because that one is the action of the system. Insulin with tyrosine kinase increase the GLUT channels in the cell membrane, allowing more glucose to get into the cell. In this graphic, you have the representation of the tyrosine kinase system. When insulin is released, insulin by itself is nothing, because insulin needs to match the receptor, and the receptor is outside of the target cell. Basically, what is the target cell of insulin? All the cells in our body. Some of them require more insulin, some of them require less insulin, but certainly all of them require insulin. And insulin is matching only with the tyrosine kinase system. By this action, and I really don't want to distract you in the chemical reactions that take place when there is a binding between insulin and the tyrosine kinase, but certainly what is the final destination? Because by binding insulin with tyrosine kinase, the final action, and keep this concept in your mind, because it's the main reason of this system, is increasing the GLUT4 in the cell that is receiving this system, the insulin and the tyrosine kinase system. By increasing the GLUT channels in the cell membrane, increase the capability of the cell to intake glucose.